If I cut you tomorrow, nobody would even notice. That's what Chad Phelps, Junior VP of Digital Optimization and Living LinkedIn Meme, said in front of 11 people, while sipping a turmeric latte and airdropping his own resume to the room like it was a TED Talk. His laugh hit the tile like a dropped wrench. Everyone chuckled nervously. I didn't. I just closed my laptop, slid my pen into my pocket, and said nothing. What I wanted to say? That every signed policy, every control, every dotted I and crossed ET in our audit logs was mine. That the only reason this company hadn't burst into regulatory flames 3 quarters ago was because I spent 8 years quietly patching holes they didn't know they had. But I didn't say it. I don't bark. I document. And documentation, unlike bravado, is admissible. Before we dive deeper, quick moment. If you're listening and this story's already gripping you, hit the like button and subscribe. 97% of you don't, and it really fuels the team behind these stories. All right, back to the quiet war. I didn't start in compliance, no one does. I started in contracts, redlining ridiculous clauses from vendors who thought data retention meant saving PDFs in Dropbox. Over time, I built a map, a system of how risk really moved through our company, not in org charts or Slack threads, but in what I called shadow systems, the undocumented truths, the version control no one tracked, the do not delete spreadsheet tabs with formulas older than some of our interns. I built processes, reviewed incident flows, created escalation chains, wrote retention policies that actually passed scrutiny, and I tied it all together into the Holy Grail, SOC2 Type 2 compliance. Clients don't care about buzzwords. They want proof that when their customer data goes through your systems, it doesn't come out the other side on Reddit. That proof has my name at the bottom. My team, well, if you could call it that, was 3 people deep. But the framework I held together was the reason 60% of our enterprise contracts renewed last year. Every major client had a clause in their MSA tying their business to the continuation of that compliance certification. If we lost it, we didn't just get a nasty letter from a lawyer. We triggered financial penalties, triggered termination options, triggered audit rights, but no one reads the appendices. No one except me. So when Chad waltzed in fresh from his consulting gig at a failed SaaS unicorn with his tight pants and tighter PowerPoints, I knew the moment he said optimization, someone was getting cut. And I don't mind being cut. I've been cut before. The difference is I know where the arteries are. My office wasn't a corner suite. It wasn't even a room. Just a glass cube tucked behind HR with a dusty ficus and a ceiling vent that rattled when the AC kicked in. But inside my bottom drawer was a fireproof file box. On it, in faded Sharpie, the label, Original Audit Docs, Do Not Move. Inside, every control set, every approval log, and a bound printout of the latest certification, signed by me, notarized, time-stamped. I kept it not for ego. I kept it because this company loves shortcuts, and when shortcuts fail, they look for someone to blame. My drawer was my insurance policy, not against being fired, but against being forgotten. I noticed the change before the insult came. First, it was the calendar invites from my own reports that I wasn't included on. Then, the late-night, just-wondering emails from Chad, CC'd to legal, asking about current risk frameworks and renewal gaps. Then it was the file requests, policies I'd authored being pulled from the drive, duplicated, renamed, with my name scrubbed. Still, I said nothing. I know how systems fail, not with a bang, but with lazy hands. I watched Chad lean into that laziness like it was a strategy. He didn't want to understand compliance. He wanted to pretend he already did. That's more dangerous than ignorance. It's arrogance with a budget. So when he finally said it, if I cut you tomorrow, nobody would even notice. I didn't get angry. I just started the quiet count in my head. I'd heard versions of that line before, and every time it meant the same thing. Someone was about to bet their future on forgetting the past. I went home that night and made a list. Not a bucket list, a burn list, systems I'd built, policies I could prove authorship on, change logs with my username baked into version histories. And of course, the one clause from the audit doc that made me smirk as I sipped my coffee at 2 a.m. All systems and controls reviewed, documented, and approved by Mason R. Kearns, Director of Risk and Compliance. Funny thing about risk, Everyone ignores it until it becomes a headline. I don't need to make noise, I just need to be quiet until the silence becomes deafening. 2 weeks after the acquisition, the tone in the office shifted from cautious optimism to caffeinated chaos. The founders, previously allergic to suits and allergic to structure, had cashed out to a VC firm that spoke exclusively in acronyms and hockey stick graphs. And with the new blood came new organs. Namely, Chad Phelps, Junior VP of Digital Optimization, which, near as I could tell, meant cut what you don't understand. He walked in on his first day wearing a vest with a QR code on the back and introduced himself at the all hands like he was accepting an Oscar. "I'm here to make us leaner, smarter, faster," he said, which roughly translates to, "I've never read a SOC2 clause in my life, but I did once yell at a Tableau dashboard." His LinkedIn had a banner photo of him giving a keynote to what I suspect was an empty conference room and a headline that read, "Building Systems That Build Themselves." Ironic, considering he was about to dismantle one. The first department meeting he sat in on, he brought his own whiteboard. That was the first red flag. The second was when he labeled my group, Risk and Compliance, as non-revenue generating bloat and asked why so many policies need one person's name on them. He circled my title, underlined it twice, and said, "We need to think about systems that don't rely on people. People are liabilities." Everyone smiled like they were at a hostage negotiation. I stared at the whiteboard like it was a chalk outline. He started poking around. I got calendar pings for quick syncs with titles like Compliance Simplification and Centralizing Risk Ops. Always sent after 7 p.m., always CCing legal. He began pulling copies of policies off the shared drive, not to read them, but to rename and re-upload them under a new folder. OPS 2.0, like slapping a new sticker on a car and calling it an upgrade. Problem was, those policies were the very artifacts the audit firm validated during our SOC2 review. Changing them mid-cycle without a clean revision trail was like defusing a bomb with a salad fork. I documented everything. Quietly. Every rename, every deleted comment thread, every time he edited a file without version control, I saved the original. Not because I planned to fight back, not yet, but because I've learned that when new blood comes in swinging, the paper trail becomes your only armor, and I wear mine under the skin. A week later, I found myself excluded from a client prep call. One of our biggest accounts, a health tech firm with regulatory teeth sharper than our legal teams, was up for renewal. Normally, I walk the client's risk lead through our controls, point by point. This time, I wasn't even invited. I watched the meeting transcript later. Chad had taken the lead, said we were streamlining compliance, called SOC2 a box-checking exercise. I almost choked on my coffee. You don't streamline SOC2, you survive it. If you're lucky, you get certified. If you're sloppy, you get sued. Then came the audit prep doc, our internal readiness checklist. It had been replaced. My name was gone. Replaced with his. A new template, no change logs, no custody notes, just a flashy new doc filled with buzzwords, half-true metrics, and a front page that said, "Owned by Chad Phelps." He'd taken the system I built, layer by layer, clause by clause, and treated it like a sandcastle he could redecorate. But he didn't know the foundation. Didn't know that every asset, every flow, every trigger in that system pointed to me. He was rewriting a maze while still standing in it. The final push was when IT told me Chad had requested view-only access to my personal calendar. Just to coordinate project priorities, they said. I knew what it meant. He wanted to see what I was doing, what I wasn't doing, what he could turn into a performance gap. I smiled politely, told IT to enable it. Then I created a new calendar. Offline, paper, black ink, red slashes for days I expected something to blow. You can only be invisible for so long before someone tries to erase you. The trick is to become part of the system they depend on, so when they pull the plug, they don't realize they just shut down their own life support. Chad thought compliance was a checkbox. I was going to show him it was a tripwire, he just hadn't stepped on it yet. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray sky day where the coffee tastes like regret and the fluorescent lights feel like interrogation. Chad had called an impromptu strategy huddle, which meant dragging the entire risk and ops team into the second floor glass aquarium he called a conference room. No agenda, no goal, just him, standing at the head of the table like a game show host who thought the prize was himself. I sat across from him. Legal was next to me, half checking their phone. Our junior analyst had brought a notepad, bless her. Chad was holding court, tossing around words like synergy and risk realignment, sketching circles and arrows that meant nothing. And then, out of nowhere, he looked directly at me, grinned, and said it. If I cut you tomorrow, nobody would even notice. He laughed. A couple others did too, the kind of brittle chuckle people give when they smell blood but aren't sure whose it is yet. Legal smirked. The intern looked like she wanted to vanish. I didn't say a word. Didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just closed my notebook, stood up, and walked out. Not fast, not dramatic, just done. The thing about working in compliance is, you get very good at silence, at knowing which silence means you're being respected, and which means you're being erased. That moment, that was an erasure. Chad wasn't just testing the water. He'd already decided to shove me in and see if anyone noticed the splash. I didn't drive straight home. I took a detour to a little cafe 3 blocks down where they knew me by name and made espresso strong enough to burn off betrayal. I sat in the corner booth and pulled out my laptop. No VPN, no company Wi-Fi, just me and the ghost network. First, I pulled up our SOC2 master controls list. 58 pages, my fingerprints on everyone. Then the audit logs, my sign-offs, my reviews, my access trails. All traceable, all time-stamped. Then the clause I was looking for. Page 9 of the signed audit engagement agreement. The named accountable individual for all active SOC2 controls shall be Mason R. Kearns, Director of Risk and Compliance. Changes to this designation must be approved by both internal audit sponsor and external audit lead, with 30-day written notice. I smiled. Just a little. Not because I was safe, but because Chad had no idea how deeply I'd woven my name into the scaffolding of this company's trust architecture. He thought he was cutting off dead weight. He didn't realize he was unplugging the server mid-transfer. That night, I went home and opened the fireproof drawer in my office. Pulled out the red binder labeled Chain of Custody, Controls V3.1. Inside, original authorship docs, printed control flow maps, backup certifications, and a notarized hard copy of our latest audit. I laid them out on the floor like tarot cards. Then I opened a clean email draft to my personal attorney. Subject: Contingency Review, Compliance Stewardship. I attached 5 PDFs, zipped the rest with password protection, and hit send. Finally, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went out to the shed, opened the old safe behind the workbench, and pulled out the black briefcase. Still locked, still pristine. It had a slot for a USB drive, a 3-ring clasp for hard copies, and a foam cutout for something heavier, like a physical signature stamp. I slid it onto the desk, unlatched it, and stared at the empty space where the future would go. I didn't feel panic, or rage, or hurt. I felt still. That kind of still you only get when the air is too quiet, right before the thunder hits. I didn't take a sick day. I took a strategy alignment offsite, which was just code for don't ask. Chad approved it, of course. Anything that got me off his radar was a win in his book. He probably thought I was off to burn sage and journal about team synergy. In reality, I was burning backups and journaling nothing, because loose ink is a liability. I started with a shared drive, not the public folders. Those were already compromised, overwritten with Chad's empty jargon and stripped of meaningful audit trails. I went into the archival mirror I'd kept for years. Authorized, mirrored, compliant. Buried deep, disguised as versioning redundancy. First pull, policy frameworks, the real ones. My original drafts with tracked changes, timestamps, approvals from departments that don't even exist anymore. You could carbon date the company from these files. I downloaded them, encrypted the bundle, and split the archive across 2 separate USBs, one for storage, one for delivery. Second pull, metadata logs. People think authorship is just a name in the header. It's not. It's in the revision history, the IP trails, the user IDs baked into the back end of our doc system. Every control, every clause, every policy had my fingerprint somewhere in the code. I ran an extraction script I wrote 4 years ago, designed to catch plagiarism during the vendor onboarding. It now worked beautifully on my own work. Results: 97% authored by MRK. The rest? Minor contributors. Nobody left in the company. Third pull, change tracking reports. These weren't required by policy, but I'd kept them anyway. Weekly summaries of who touched what, when, and why. Most people ignored the alerts. I didn't. I set them to print in hard copy, watched the pages spit out like testimony. 62 pages, black and white, date stamped, court ready. All of this went into the briefcase. It wasn't just any case. It was the one I got after our first successful audit. A gift to myself. Matte black, reinforced edges, TSA grade locks, memory foam compartments. It looked like it held a weapon. And in a way, it did. On my lunch break, I walked to a quiet cafe a few blocks away, the Green Cap. Best cortado in the district, and, more importantly, the usual haunt of Carol, the lead on our external audit team. We didn't sit together. That would have looked too intentional, but I made sure she saw me, gave her a casual nod, and on my way out, dropped this line as I passed. Hey, Carol, delivery's on schedule for Friday. Might not be the usual handoff, but everything's intact. She blinked, nodded slowly. Auditors don't say much when they're confused, but they remember everything. Back at the office, I kept my face neutral. I didn't pack up my desk, didn't start whispering. That's how amateurs get flagged. Instead, I filed a PTO request for next Thursday and Friday, just enough time to vanish after the hammer dropped. The final touch came at midnight. In my home office, I clicked through one last internal portal, the asset registry. It was where we tracked all policy custodianship, not just who owned a document, but who had been the steward since last audit cycle. My name appeared 47 times. Chad's, 0. I exported the list, printed it, folded it once, carefully, and tucked it inside the case. Then I took out the USB drive, labeled it, Custodian Trail M. Kearns, slid it into the slot beside the documents, locked the case. I placed it beside my front door, ready for pickup. I didn't feel clever or victorious. That's not what this was. This wasn't revenge, it was preservation. This was what you do when someone turns your life's work into a throwaway line in a budget deck. You document, you timestamp, you sign your name with ink so indelible they can't scrub it from the walls even if they burn the building down. Chad thought he was streamlining me. What he didn't know was, you can't streamline what you don't understand, and once it's gone, you can't rebuild it. Not from scratch, not in time. They didn't even send Chad. Too cowardly or too clever, hard to say. Instead, they dispatched a deer-eyed HR manager named Bree, who walked into my office clutching a thin manila folder like it was going to bite her. She had that brittle, overly rehearsed smile of someone who just finished a training video on delivering difficult conversations with empathy. I let her talk. Mason, this isn't disciplinary per se, it's just a performance alignment document. A few concerns raised, nothing formal yet, just signatures to acknowledge receipt. She slid it across my desk like it was radioactive. The language was laughable. Phrases like insufficient engagement with evolving optimization frameworks and limited participation in strategic transformation initiatives. Not a word about controls, audit cycles, or data retention. In other words, they couldn't find real dirt, so they started sweeping imaginary dust. I skimmed it slowly, part theater, part documentation. Then I smiled, signed my name cleanly at the bottom, and said, "Thanks, Bree. Can I get a copy for my records?" She blinked. Sure, I can. Yeah." I walked her to the printer myself, watched the page come out, filed it in a folder labeled Transition Notes. Not retaliation, just record keeping, the kind that holds up in court. After she left, I walked down the hall to the archive room, my sanctuary. Inside, it smelled like paper and dry toner. I unlocked the cabinet labeled SOC2 primary and pulled the hard copy binder, V4.3, thumbed to the signature page. There it was. Black ink, sharp strokes dated 3 months ago. All systems and controls have been reviewed, documented, and approved by Mason R. Kearns, Director of Risk and Compliance. That one line had carried us through the last renewal. That one name had made our external auditor breathe easy and let legal close the biggest deal in the company's history. My name. I slid the page from its sleeve, made a pristine copy, and placed the original back in the binder like returning a relic to its shrine. The copy? That went into the briefcase. Back home, I sat at my desk, turned off all sync drives, and pulled out the secondary USB, wiped it clean, reloaded the full audit chain, control frameworks, policy version history, internal memos confirming my authorship, and screenshots of metadata logs. Time-stamped, indexed, encrypted. I labeled it in neat black letters on white tape. Evidence, custodian trail. I held it for a moment in my palm before snapping it into place in the briefcase's molded slot. It clicked in with a soft finality, like a puzzle piece locking into judgment. Then I opened my inbox, drafted an email to the external audit lead, Carol. Subject, SOC2 package, updated delivery plan. Body, hi Carol, just confirming the delivery of the handoff package is still scheduled as discussed. There will be a minor adjustment to the format, but all documentation remains intact and under verified custody. Appreciate your flexibility. Mason. I didn't wait for a reply. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, poured a drink, and leaned against the counter as the ice melted slow and quiet. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even tense. I felt calibrated. They thought they were forcing my hand. What they didn't know? My hand had been signing the foundation of this company for nearly a decade, and they'd just handed me a form that proved they never bothered to understand the signature. It came faster than I expected. Thursday afternoon, 3:42 p.m., right after our standing ops sync. I was back at my desk reviewing vendor subcontrol maps when I got the Slack from HR. Hey Mason, quick touch base in ConFB. No subject line, no emoji, just that hollow, corporatized vagueness that always smells like bleach and bad decisions. I already knew. Still, I closed the compliance console, ejected my personal USB, powered down slowly, methodically, like you would a system you cared about. Then I stood, grabbed my notepad, empty for effect, and walked toward Conference B. Bree was waiting. So was Chad. He didn't sit. He paced behind her like a shark that had watched a YouTube tutorial on dominance. Bree did the talking, of course. We've reviewed the strategic direction of the company, and at this point, leadership has determined that your role is being sunset. Sunset. That was the word they picked, like they were sending me off with a mimosa and a soft jazz playlist. No talk of transition plans, no handoff, no exit documentation. Just a line at the bottom of a printout with my name on it and a pre-checked box labeled Company Assets Returned. I signed it. No flourish, no remark. Bree looked nervous. Chad looked satisfied. And I? I looked at the clock. 3:59. Do I need to be escorted? I asked. Bree blinked. That's up to you, of course, but I'll see myself out. I returned to my desk under the eyes of half a dozen people pretending to be heads down in Google Sheets, packed my personal items into a single folder, left the framed compliance certification on the wall, let them see what they'd tossed away. Then, on my way out, I made one final stop. Reception. Janine looked up from her tablet with a start. Mason? I handed her a small matte black package, neatly wrapped, taped precisely. On the front, Audit Team Confidential for pickup Friday, 10 a.m. Scheduled delivery, I said, sliding it onto her desk. Important handoff. Please make sure it gets where it's going. She nodded, confused but professional. Will do. And that was it. No door slam, no final speech, no petty file deletions or password scrambles. I didn't poison the well. I just drained it clean and left the cup upside down. I stepped into the parking lot under an overcast sky that hadn't decided if it was going to rain. The briefcase was already in my trunk, strapped in like a passenger. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and didn't look back at the building. Not even once. Because the truth was, the moment they let me walk out, they'd already invited the audit team into a house without walls. And tomorrow, when that black package hit Carol's hands, there wouldn't be any doubt. They hadn't just fired a person. They'd amputated their own signature. Friday morning arrived the way panic does, slow, unnoticed at first, until it's already in the room, sitting in your chair, sipping your coffee. The audit team rolled in at 9:57 a.m., right on schedule. Carol was leading, flanked by two associates who carried those silver audit cases that always made our sales execs break out in hives. They signed in at reception and asked, as usual, "Is Mason available?" Janine blinked. Mason's no longer with us." Carol didn't react. She just tilted her head, slow and mechanical. I see. Who's handling the audit coordination now? Janine looked toward the hall. I think maybe Mike or someone in ops. Let me get Chad. Confusion was already setting in. They were escorted to conference room 3A, the same one where Mason had prepped them every cycle for the past 5 years. But this time, there were no folders laid out, no pre-printed maps, just an empty table and a nervous intern with a laptop that wouldn't stop chiming. Chad strolled in 10 minutes late, carrying a coffee he didn't offer to anyone. Hey, Carol, good to see you. We're in a bit of a transition period, but I think you'll find everything in order. Carol sat still. Who is your current named control steward? Chad smirked. Well, it's more of a team approach now. She said nothing, just opened her own case and pulled out a printed engagement letter, tapped her fingernail on a single clause. Per agreement, all current control documentation must be traceable to a designated accountable individual, confirmed by signature. Your prior steward of record, Mason Kearns, is no longer employed. So, before we begin, she reached into her bag and pulled out the package, the one Mason left at reception. Chad froze. What's that? It was delivered to our team this morning, labeled as a handoff. Shall we? She opened the box. Inside was silence. Not literal, but the kind of silence that fills a room when everyone realizes they've just seen something they can't unsee. One by one, Carol pulled out neatly packed folders, labeled, indexed, control frameworks, access logs, custodial trails, change histories, every last compliance asset, all printed and signed, and on every page in black ink, the same name, Mason R. Kearns, Director of Risk and Compliance. There were no co-signers, no team names, no overlapping initials. Every policy document, every decision trail pointed back to one person. Carol flipped through the final folder. It was a signed attestation of custodianship, dated the week prior. At the bottom, a typed note. This package constitutes all known validated control artifacts as of time of departure. No further updates have been authorized. She closed the folder, looked up at Chad. Who has assumed custodial responsibility for these controls? Chad cleared his throat. We're transitioning to, she raised a hand. Let me be clear. These documents are frozen in status unless a new steward has been designated in writing and confirmed by both legal and our audit office. Has that happened? Silence. The intern slowly lowered her coffee. Carol gently placed the final document back into the case, snapped it shut. I'm going to recommend we pause certification review until we can validate the chain of custody and confirm the legitimacy of any post-departure updates. Please notify legal. We'll reschedule pending clarification. She stood. Chad opened his mouth, maybe to object, maybe to scramble, but no words came. Carol didn't wait. She walked out, audit team in tow, case in hand. The door clicked shut, and somewhere in legal's inbox, 3 contracts tied to SOC2 compliance were already waiting to detonate. It started with a reply all. An innocuous update from our client success team, just a heads up that our SOC2 recertification was under strategic review. The language was neutered, softened like corporate tofu. But the moment it hit the inboxes of 3 Fortune-tier clients, the responses lit up like emergency flares. The first came from a healthcare analytics firm based out of Chicago. Short, clipped, no greeting. Per section 14.3 of our agreement, any material lapse in certification during the audit window triggers mandatory disclosure and indemnity review. Has this occurred? Then came the financial compliance vendor, even colder. Kindly confirm current SOC2 certification status and responsible signatory. Our renewal is contingent. And finally, from the legal counsel of a multinational retail conglomerate with 6 data-sharing integrations in play. One question. Was your named compliance officer dismissed during the audit period? That was it. Just one line, and with it, the whole castle started to tilt. Legal went into emergency mode, war room booked, external counsel looped in, contracts dragged from archives. People started printing things, which hadn't happened in months. I heard later that Chad walked into that meeting with his usual bravado, saying, "We have everything under control." No irony, No understanding. Someone asked for the updated control log. He didn't have it. Someone else asked who had access to the live compliance dashboard. No one did, because it wasn't live anymore. Mason had revoked his credentials, not maliciously, just by virtue of leaving. And without him, the system had no custodian. No one with the verified history, no one with the credentials legally tied to the version history. Every document they tried to reassemble rang hollow. The timestamps were gone. The internal sign-offs were incomplete. The policies looked fresh, but that was the problem. They were too fresh. Audit trails can't be fabricated, and anyone who's ever stared down a federal review knows, if it smells like retroactive cleanup, it becomes evidence. Meanwhile, the three client teams had begun whispering to each other, as they do. Fortune 500 legal circles are smaller than you'd think. The word pause turned into non-compliance, then into breach of contract. By Monday, 2 vendors had triggered their right to delay integration. One client froze invoice payments pending verification. A European customer requested a full export of their data from our servers, citing chain of trust erosion. Internally, someone tried to backfill a signature on one of the control documents, but Mason's name was digital, time-locked, IP tagged, and the new version, a blank, unsigned PDF with a note at the top, drafted by ops. The audit team refused to accept it. Compliance isn't a mood, it's a ledger. You either have the chain of custody or you don't, and we didn't. Chad tried spinning it at an all-hands, said Mason hadn't scaled with the business, that new efficiencies were being implemented, that compliance would come back stronger than ever. No one asked questions. No one applauded. The silence was thicker than the coffee that morning. That afternoon, legal updated the executive risk register. Line item number 3, loss of SOC2 certification may trigger cascading client offboarding. Line item number 4, custodianship gap under active review. Line item number 5, no internal replacement named for departed compliance officer. The irony? Mason hadn't sabotaged anything. He'd simply left the room. And in doing so, he proved that the only thing holding our credibility together had been his signature. The office wasn't flashy. Second floor, shared building, just down the hall from a tax attorney who always smelled like peppermint and legal doom. The walls were bare, the desk was pine, and the only art was a framed printout of an RFC standard. Subnet masks and CIDR blocks. It was exactly the kind of place no one noticed until it mattered. Mason sat behind the desk, reading through a contract that didn't use the word visionary once. A real rarity these days. Outside the frosted glass, someone knocked twice, then entered without waiting. It was Dev, one of the partners at the advisory firm that had picked Mason up less than 3 weeks after his name vanished from the old company's org chart. Dev dropped a folder on the desk with a dry smile. 3 more, he said, referred directly. One of them used the phrase, post-Mason collapse, unironically. Mason opened the folder. Retail. Healthcare. A startup he didn't even recognize, but they all had the same requirement highlighted in yellow. Requires established signature authority on all control documentation. Pre-validated. That was the thing. Most companies were built on code, but the ones that survived were built on trust. And trust came down to a name. A real one, on real documents, not some padded slide deck shoved into a PDF with a fake timestamp. The TV mounted on the corner wall was on mute, running a live news feed, a tech segment. Mason wasn't watching, not at first, but the familiar face caught his eye. Chad. He was standing at a podium outside the company's headquarters, flanked by someone from PR and someone who looked like they'd rather be hit by a bus than answer questions. Chad's face was slick with sweat. His tie was too tight. The chyron below read, Firm responds to compliance lapse during certification cycle. Mason didn't turn up the volume. He didn't need to. He'd already seen the clip enough times. Someone had leaked it from the audit review. A scratchy voiceover from Carol, the audit lead, playing over a still of the briefcase on the table. You fired the person whose name validated your entire risk structure. Simple, clear, final. The video had made its way through the compliance world like gospel. It wasn't rage. It wasn't drama. It was worse. For Chad, anyway. It was fact. Cold. Documented. Time-stamped. Mason flipped to the signature page of the new client contract. Black ink. Legal lines. The kind he didn't need to reread anymore. He picked up the pen, clicked it once, and signed. M.R. Kearns, no flourish, just wait. He paused, glanced once more at the screen, and then down at the folder in front of him. 3 more companies, 3 more names, none of them asking for charm, just certainty. He leaned back slightly, smirked. They thought I was invisible, he murmured. Then he capped the pen. Turns out, my signature wasn't.